Gonzaga has had a player picked in the NBA draft 4 straight years. Who is going to keep that streak going in 2025?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. It's the dog days of summer. The sports are not sporting like we want them to, but folks, this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, we got a simple, straightforward show for you today here on Locked On Zags. We're just discussing all 13 scholarship players for the Gonzaga Bulldogs in this upcoming season, taking a look at their chances of being in the NBA draft. Not just the 2025 NBA draft, although with a handful of seniors on the roster, we know many players that will be their last chance to get selected in the draft. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about players who probably aren't going to get drafted this year, but might have a future where they ultimately get selected in the NBA draft. We're going wings in the first segment. We'll go bigs in the second segment. We'll talk guards in the third and final segment. Like I said, straightforward today, all NBA draft focused. And we start with the player almost certainly the most likely on the roster to be selected in any future NBA draft, and that's Michael Ajayi. If Gonzaga's streak of having a player selected in the draft is going to reach 5 years in a row, it is very, very, very likely because Michael Ajayi gets picked in the 2025 NBA draft. He is a senior this upcoming season. He has no more years of eligibility because he spent 2 years at the junior college level at Pierce College. He then spent 1 year last year at Pepperdine, and now he is at Gonzaga for his fourth and final season of eligibility. The pros for Michael Ajayi, obviously he's already been seen by scouts. He already went through the NBA scouting combine. He's already done a handful of workouts with teams, so he's already gotten feedback from scouts, from general managers in that space. That's a huge leg up that he has over many of the other players on this Gonzaga roster. In terms of just on-court talent, he's built positionally. He's built well for his position. He's kind of a 3-4 hybrid, which is what I expect him to play at Gonzaga. And I think he's built well to kind of play that same role as a potential small ball 4 or just a straight up wing at the NBA level. He's a very good rebounder for his position. That allows him to play the 3 and still be able to gobble up rebounds at the NBA level and at the collegiate level, frankly. He's a versatile scorer. We've seen him. He has the ability to shoot threes. He has the ability to score around the rim. He's a good free throw shooter. He's demonstrated all different types of scoring abilities. The cons for him, he's an older prospect. In the last couple of years, we've started to see a little bit more of kind of more of those older prospects getting drafted earlier. Jaime Jaquez was a very good recent example of somebody who was drafted in the later first round and immediately succeeded for the Miami Heat. Last year, that kind of fell off. Terrence Shannon fell in the draft further than people thought that he would. Tyler Kolek fell in the draft a little bit. Dalton Connect was probably the most notable faller in terms of older prospects. So we'll see if that kind of trend continues or not, but Ajayi will be his ceiling will be capped, and where teams evaluate him will be limited because of his age coming into the draft in 2025. The 3-point volume wasn't there at Pepperdine. Like 2.5 3-point attempts per game. I'm sure scouts told him, hey, we love that you shot 42% last year, but we want to see that you can do that on a bigger volume of 3-point attempts. The defense is just kind of a question mark. I think Gonzaga's system will and just the fact that Gonzaga's playing better teams, especially in the non-conference, will allow us to see Ajayi kind of get a better sense of what he is like defensively. And then right now, the big con on him is just the quality of opponents faced. Part of the reason Gonzaga is going to help him is not just, he's playing most of the same teams in the WCC, of course, but he will face teams like UConn and Kentucky and UCLA and San Diego State in the non-conference, and then he'll get some opportunities in the NCAA tournament as well, which should allow him to kind of showcase the skills he has against some of those better quality opponents. I put a likelihood of getting drafted for each player. For Michael Ajayi, I got it at 70% right now. I think he's very, very likely going to be picked in the 2025 draft, barring obviously injury or anything like that. I think he's going to come out. He's going to have a big season. He's going to put up big numbers, and he's going to get picked potentially in the late first round, although I would be more likely to predict he's going to get picked somewhere in the mid to late second round in 2025. Other wings on the roster to talk about: Steele Venters. Could be in this draft class, could also be in the following draft class. He does have 2 years of eligibility, this year and another year. We're not sure if he's going to take that final year. He's obviously already been in college for a long time, but last year was a medical redshirt year. He also has that extra year of COVID eligibility. So if he wants to be in college for 6 years, he absolutely can. Venters has also already declared for the NBA draft. He did that before last season, after his season at Eastern Washington, his final year there. So he has also that experience of going through the draft process and getting feedback from scouts and everything like that. So that's an advantage for him. The other pros for him, pretty simple. He's a great three-point shooter. He's got good positional size. He's a good off-ball mover. He's good at cutting without the basketball. But really, the pro is the three-point shooting. That is what is going to make Steele Venters money at the next level. The cons: injury history is now something that will be held against him, as well as age. The athleticism is not at the level that most NBA players are going to be more athletic than him. He's in the lower half, certainly maybe even lower 25% for NBA level athletes. We haven't, and again, as somebody who hasn't seen him on a nightly basis, I've seen highlights, I've watched some full games from Eastern, but without having seen him in Gonzaga's offense, a lot of this is harder to predict, and that'll be the case with more players we're going to talk about, like Emmanuel Inocente or Ismaila Diagne or Braden Smith. But for Steele, I think defense is a concern. And the fact that when you look at the numbers he put up at Eastern, he didn't get a lot of rebounds. He didn't get a lot of assists. He really scored the basketball well, but he didn't demonstrate a lot else. So NBA scouts are certainly going to want to see, can you connect? Can you make passes? Can you make reads? Can you rebound for your position? Those kind of things I think are going to be held against him. Ball handling. Can you put the ball on the deck, attack, close out, strive to the rim? Those kind of things I think we just need to see more from him. But if those don't pop at a high level, that's going to impact his odds. Right now, I've Steele at about 20% for getting drafted. And honestly, that might be a little high. I think there's a fairly limited chance that he ends up actually getting picked, although he could certainly be a guy who plays well in the summer league, whatever year he ends up leaving Gonzaga. Dusty Stromer's next, 2027 class for Dusty, as he's coming into his sophomore year again. Certainly could leave early, but if he were to spend all 4 years at Gonzaga, he would be part of that 2027 draft class. The pros for Dusty: long athleticism. The three-point shooting that we saw towards the end of last season certainly is a bonus for him right now, although the overall body of work in that area is a bit questionable. And then defensive instincts. He's a good defensive player. We saw just the high basketball IQ, knocking the ball away, using that kind of just intensity and tenacity to make plays on the defensive end of the floor. The cons for him are kind of everything else offensively. The corner three-point shot looked good. That kind of puts him in a spot where he could be a 3-and-D wing. NBA scouts aren't looking for him to be somebody who attacks the rim and has the ball in his hands a lot. That's not going to be his role at the next level, but it is still something you want to see a little bit more of from him. Can he handle the basketball? Is pressure from opposing defense is going to be a problem for him? Scoring around the rim, he just needs to get stronger. Getting stronger will allow him to finish through contact, draw contact, get to the free throw line. You want to see some improvements in passing and reading the floor and facilitating, which are just things that come with time as he gets more familiarity with college basketball. His frame as well. He just needs, like we said, he just needs to get stronger. I'm not super high on Dusty Stromer's draft prospects right now. I have a 15% likelihood of getting drafted overall, but a growth physically and some more experience knocking down more outside shots, making better reads on the offensive end, and continued growth defensively could absolutely raise that ranking in the future. Two more guys here before we move on to the bigs. You got Emmanuel Inocente in the 2027 class. Again, we haven't seen a lot of Emmanuel, and he was in a system at Tarleton State that does not look as similar to NBA offenses as Gonzaga does. So I think we'll learn a lot more about kind of his potential future in that area. We do know he's got great positional size. He has experience playing internationally in FIBA tournaments. He's great at rebounding for his position. His assist numbers were great, and he's kind of been lauded as this very quality defensive player. The cons are mostly on the offensive end of the floor. He's not a great three-point shooter. He's not a great scorer. He just hasn't demonstrated a lot of scoring ability up to this point. Again, he's only played 1 year of college basketball. The other stuff is great. The rebounding is great. The passing is great. The defense is great. You have to be able to score the basketball at the college level to get drafted. It's just, unless you are an otherworldly defensive player. And even then, people were really adamant about not taking Ryan Dunn this year from Virginia, even though he was a prolific defensive player because his offense wasn't very good. So for Innocente, it's not going to happen this year. Maybe the year after that, maybe even 2 years after that, if we start to see improvement offensively and he gets a bigger role, maybe it leads to that. But I got him at a 3% chance right now. And then closing it out with Jun-Suk Yo, who is a 2026 class. He's got this year and one more year. I don't expect Yo to play much this year. The pros for him would be that FIBA experience. He's a good athlete. He's a good rebounder for his size. The cons, the three-point shot hasn't looked very good. The decision-making is still a question for him. He's now an older prospect at this point. Didn't look particularly great defensively. I'm not sure I see an NBA future for Jun-Suk Yo. We'll see if he gets much playing time this year, but frankly, I kind of have him on that couple spots outside the rotation at this point, so I wouldn't be surprised if he played. If he didn't play any more than he did last year, if not less than he did last year. We're going to talk big men next. Is Ben Gregg Gonzaga's best front court prospect, or is it a player who might not even see the court much this season? We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, FanDuel. I love sports. You love sports. We all love sports. That's why we're listening to sports podcasts here in late July. I never want them to stop. But outside of the Olympics, it's the dog days of summer, and we just don't have that many games. The sports aren't really sportsing like we want them to. However, FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. And if you want to watch these Olympics with a vested interest right now on the men's basketball side, Team USA's odds to take home the gold have increased to minus 550 right now. Canada is next up, plus 850 to take home that gold medal. France is next at plus 1400. The other Zags, Petrusev and Serbia are down to plus 2300 after that loss to Team USA. Rui and Japan remain at plus 50,000. Would be quite the stunner if they were able to pull that one off. If you want to get in on any of this action, watch those Olympics with more of an interest, head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And folks, you want to hear more about the NBA draft? This is getting you thinking like, hey, who else is going to get picked? Who are the first round guys? Who should I be paying attention to? Check out the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. Rafael Barlow does a fantastic job. He scouts internationally. He's got great intel on guys that maybe aren't even on the radar for the 2025 class. They also have Leaf Tulane, our friend on Locked On College Basketball, Richard Stayman, Sam Ferris. There's a handful of fantastic analysts over on Locked On NBA Big Board. Check it out. It's a great, great show if you haven't done so yet. Folks, we're going to talk bigs here now in the second segment. We'll start with Ben Gregg. Ben Gregg is entering his final year at Gonzaga. I know every time we talk about the roster and the eligibility left, people are surprised to find out that this is Ben's last year of eligibility. Unfortunately, that is the case. So he will be playing his last year at Gonzaga in 24-25. And there's a lot to like about Ben's NBA profile. Really, there's two things in particular that definitely stand out: his size and his three-point shooting. Those are the skill sets that matter. He is 6'10", and he can shoot the ball from beyond the arc. 37% three-point shooter the last couple of years. He moves well without the basketball. He's good at finding his spots. He has a high basketball IQ. He's got toughness as well. He's tough around the rim. He's not going to be like an impactful rim protecting type at the next level, but he's got toughness enough to be able to handle some of those bigs and then force them away from the rim on the offensive end of the floor. He's also a highly efficient scorer, not just from three. He's really efficient around the rim. He's great at getting out in transition as a big man. He's got a lot of mobility. The cons would be defensively the lateral mobility. Can he be a switchable defender at the next level? That's the most important thing for any big man prospect. And right now that is not something that's necessarily guaranteed for Ben, that he's going to be able to consistently deliver defensively when getting caught in screens and that in those situations. The verticality isn't great for Ben. We haven't seen a lot of measurements on that though. So that's something that could improve or could be better than maybe we anticipate. Just the overall athleticism, speed, and agility. It's not bad. He moves pretty well, frankly, but I'm not sure that it's going to be like high level NBA good. And then again, he's not a rim protector. I don't think you're expecting that from him, but it certainly would help him if he had that going for him. I think age is a factor here too, but again, he's not like, it's not like Steele or somebody like that where they're older than even a normal college prospect. I kind of unsure on Ben. He hasn't gotten a lot of NBA draft kind of buzz. Killian Tilly didn't get drafted despite being a more efficient three-point shooter in college. Now, Tilly had a lot of injury issues, whereas Ben does not have that kind of mark against him, so maybe that'll help. I put Ben at about 35%. If he starts all year this year, he puts up big numbers, averages 14, 13 points a game, shoots 38, 40% from three. I could see him getting some serious looks from NBA teams at that point. Looking forward to the other bigs here. Braden Huff in the class of 2027. Obviously, that could change for him as well. Somewhat similar to Ben, the pros would be the outside shooting and the size. He's also a highly, highly efficient low post scorer as well. I think his age works in his favor at this point. Obviously, that depends how long he stays at Gonzaga. But if he were to go after this year, that would be something that would be viewed as a positive by scouts. Even though he'd have completed 3 years academically in college, he'd be a redshirt sophomore, having not played as a true freshman. The cons for Braden Huff, the defense. Again, same thing with Ben, the lateral mobility. Can he be a switchable big at the next level? The ball handling skills, how many times he put the ball on the deck and had it immediately taken away from him by a guard. Again, he's not going to be posting up at the NBA level, but if he's got the ball away from the rim, he's pump faking, he's attacking a closeout, and he's driving to the basket, and NBA guards can just pick that thing away from him, that's not going to work. He's going to have to find ways to take better care of the basketball. The passing needs some work as well. It often takes Gonzaga bigs a few years to kind of get more comfortable passing out of those double teams and kind of facilitating the offense. We haven't seen him have to do that all that much yet, but it's definitely a skill that needs to improve for him to get drafted. I have him at 30% right now. It's just a little too early to tell. If he balls out next year, kind of like he did last year, makes some improvements defensively, makes some improvements in terms of taking care of the basketball, I think those odds could definitely increase, as we expect that he would take on an even bigger role the following year with Ben Gregg gone, with potentially Graham Ike gone as well. We're going to get to Graham, but I actually want to start with Ismaila Diagne. Diagne is an incoming freshman for Gonzaga's roster. He'd be a class of 2028. May not last that long in a Gonzaga uniform. Diagne is one of the only other players on Gonzaga's roster who has been at all mentioned as a potential NBA draft prospect. However, he's coming. You might see him on 2025 draft boards, and if you see that and you're thinking, wow, they're thinking Diagne is going to play a big role and start, whatever, like, he's not going to get drafted in 2025. He was on that draft radar if he'd stayed overseas, but by coming to Gonzaga and choosing to come to a program that already has an established front court with Braden Huff, with Ben Gregg, with Graham Ike, with Michael Ajayi, Diagne is effectively taking himself out of consideration for the 2025 NBA draft. Doesn't mean that even in a small role, teams might not start looking at him. It's not impossible that he gets drafted in 2025, but it's very, very unlikely. But I say 2028 knowing that would be after his senior year. It's also a pretty good chance he doesn't make it that long. His age working in his favor right now. Again, the longer he stays at Gonzaga, the less that works in his favor, and eventually it becomes a negative. International experience absolutely helps. Having played on an international stage for prominent programs in Spain definitely helps. Diagne is known as a rim protector, and he's very, very high-level athlete. Those are the main things working for him right now. The cons, we haven't seen him play against Division I college basketball competition. That's a con right now that's obviously going to change when he does get those opportunities. But having not seen it yet, we don't really know. Outside shooting, is that a thing that's there? We kind of have to see what that looks like for him. He's just unknown. And that's not a con that lasts very long. And certainly it's an easier con to fix than height or age or things like that. But it makes it harder to project him right now. Having said all that, I think there's about a 50-50 shot that Diagne at some point gets drafted. I don't think it's going to happen in 2025, but 26, 27, 28, wouldn't be surprised at all if in one of those draft classes, Ismaila Diagne is one of the 60 players selected. And then last and very certainly not least, Graham Ike. Graham Ike's 2026 class, but as we've talked about on the show before, there's a fairly good chance that this is his final year in college basketball. If he stays healthy, if he plays well, I don't know that he comes back for a sixth year. He's had a full season miss with an injury. He's got the COVID year, so he's got the ability to come back. I'm not sure if he's going to. I don't know. I'm not saying for sure he won't. It just seems like it's plausible that this is his final year, even though he has an extra year technically. The pros for Graham Ike, he's an elite low post scorer. He is physical. He's tough. He establishes position on the block extremely well. He finishes with his left hand. He finishes over his right shoulder with his right hand. He's got a ton of touch around the rim. He's got a little bit of a mid-range game as well. He is a very good scorer. He's great at drawing contact. He's decent at the free throw line. He's a good rebounder, and he's just tough and strong. The cons are basically that a lot of those skills aren't translatable in the modern NBA, unfortunately. It's the same conversation we've had with Drew Timme. Graham Ike doesn't display the lateral mobility necessary to be a switchable defender at the NBA level. The outside shooting, he actually was pretty good, but it's a very low volume. Graham Ike is not going to be a floor spacer in the NBA. That's not what teams are scouting him for. That's not what he has displayed. He knocked down some threes in some important moments. He knocked down a few against Purdue last year. Matt Painter actually talked about that recently of like, oh yeah, they had guys hitting threes that we didn't expect them to hit when we faced Mark Few last year. But it's not really a super strength of his. The age is going to work against him. The injury history is going to work against him. The lack of rim protection is going to work against him, and passing. I kind of struggled whether I'd consider passing a pro or a con. I think he's still got work to do in that area, but also at the NBA level, pounding the ball to him on the block and hoping he passes out a double team, that's just not something that's going to happen. The likelihood for Graham Ike of getting drafted, I have it under 10%. It's probably closer to 5%. Honestly, it's maybe even lower than that. Not a knock on Graham at all. But if a fully healthy Drew Timme can put up All-American caliber seasons and not get drafted because of the same issues that Graham Ike has, what would Graham have to do as a fifth-year senior with his injury history in order to get drafted? I mean, unless he averages like 30 a game, I just don't see it. And that's not a knock on Graham. It's just a fact about what the NBA is prioritizing at this point. Let's talk guards. Gonzaga's got a trio of senior guards. Are any of them going to hear their name called in the 2025 NBA draft? We're going to discuss that coming up in just a second. But first, I want to tell you all about today's sponsor, Ibata. Are you trying to take that dream vacation this summer, but you're dreading the cost? With Ibata, you can get cash back on all of your purchases, so you can spend more time making memories and less time dreaming about them. With Ibata, earn hundreds on items from groceries to beauty supplies to even toys. You can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you are purchasing. The average Ibata user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. It could cover the cost of a flight that you've been eyeing or the fancy dinner that you've been craving. It's time you join the over 50 million users who choose Ibata to earn cash back every single time they shop. Right now, Ibata is offering our listeners $5 just for trying the app by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibata app to start earning cash back using code LOCKEDONCollege. That's IBOTTA, Ibata, in the Google Play or Apple App Store using code LOCKEDONCollege. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still talking about the entire roster and their odds of being selected in a future NBA draft. We talked about the wings in the first segment there. We talked Michael Ajayi, Steele Venters, Dusty Stromer, their chances of getting drafted. Talked about the bigs in the second segment, a lot of bigs who maybe don't have the requisite skills to be impactful at the NBA level just because the NBA and college are different, and Gonzaga utilizes their bigs in a different way than a lot of NBA teams are doing so at this point. Now we're going to close out the show talking guards. 3 of the 4 guards we're going to talk about here are all entering their final season of college basketball eligibility. The other one is not even going to play this year. We'll get to him in a second, but we're going to start with the newcomer, at least one of the 2 newcomers out of this group. That's Khalif Battle, coming over from Arkansas, spent time at Butler and Temple prior to that. This is his final year of college basketball eligibility. The pros for him, he's a great scorer. He's got this perfect like sixth man microwave type scorer coming off the bench vibe to him. And it's not even just a vibe. I mean, it's what he's done for the majority of his career. Khalif Battle is a fantastic player who went from Butler to Temple to Arkansas, and yet he spent the majority of his time not as a starter. I think he's only started like 32 out of 100 plus games in his collegiate career. He's already kind of familiar with that come off the bench and light it up mentality, and he's got the skill set to do it. He is elite at putting pressure on the rim. You want to talk about the skills that matter for guards? The outside shooting is huge. Size is huge, but being able to get to the rim, force defenders to either foul you or let you score at the basket, that is a critical skill that Khalif Battle has in droves. He's got great positional size as well. He's an experienced player. His off-ball movement is fantastic. He doesn't need the ball in his hands to thrive. Like we said, that kind of microwave score. Come in, catch passes, knock down shots, pump fake, drive to the basket, get to the free throw line, score 8 points in 3 minutes, and force the other team to take a timeout. Like, that's the kind of stuff that Khalif Battle does. The cons for Khalif Battle, he's not a point guard, which again, the positional size works in his favor in the sense that he is big enough to play a two guard, but he's not a facilitator. He's not really even a secondary ball handler. Like, I don't think you're going to run the offense through Khalif Battle much, like in the NBA level, or even at Gonzaga. He's not going to be the person, getting the team into the offense types of situation. That's just not really his game. The outside shooting, I think, is the biggest question mark. I don't want to say he's bad as a three-point shooter, because he's not, but is he good enough to be NBA draft worthy, considering his age and considering some of the other factors with his three-point shooting? That's the question. He comes out of Gonzaga, shoots 44% next year from three, then yeah, probably. He's going to kind of have a Malachi Smith vibe to him in that regard, but he's a little bit bigger, a little bit better at getting to the rim. But if he comes out and shoots 36%, well, it's not bad. Might not be enough to really kind of generate that kind of interest at the NBA level. The age is a factor against him, of course. The injury history is a factor against him, of course, as well. I've met about 25%, but honestly, it wouldn't stun me. 25 is maybe a little bit too low. There's absolutely an outcome where Khalif Battle does enough this year in a sixth-man role, which is what we kind of project for him, to be somebody who gets picked in the later part of that second round next year. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Looking ahead to the other guards on the roster, you got Ryan Nembhard, 2025 class. This is his senior year here coming up. The pros for him are going to sound very similar to the scouting report on his older brother, Andrew. Ryan is a menace in transition. He's an elite throw-ahead passer. He gets out in transition with the best of them. His speed is otherworldly. He's going to be one of the fastest players in this draft class, no doubt about it. Transition offense, overall speed, pick and roll. He's a maestro in the pick and roll. His ability to make the right reads, make those kind of tight, narrow passes, get the ball in the hands of players in the positions to score. He's an overall gifted passer, not just in transition, not just in the pick and roll. Those are the two main areas he excels, but his overall ability to read the floor, make good decisions, hit guys with passes is excellent. He's pretty good at rim pressure too. Probably not quite at the Khalif Battle level, in part because his size just doesn't allow him to finish through contact quite as easily, but he is good at attacking closeout and getting to the basket. He's got the familial bloodlines. I don't know how much it actually matters, but it does matter to scouts and general managers and folks. They will consider this when looking at his draft profile. And he's, of course, got the experience. He's been in multiple NCAA tournaments. He's been playing at a high level, big minutes throughout his college career at two really prolific programs in Creighton and, of course, Gonzaga. The cons for him: size and age, which are unfortunately two things you really cannot control. He is not tall enough, he is not strong enough, and he is not young enough to be considered a blue chip or premier NBA draft prospect. He's just not. Factor in the three-point shooting, which was abysmal in the first half of last year and got markedly better in the second half. But overall, it's not like he was, a 40% three-point shooter at Creighton and then dipped significantly. He was a fine three-point shooter at Creighton, and then he was really bad to start out at Gonzaga, and then he was better in the second half of the year. Even if he has the best three-point shooting season of his career, this final season at Gonzaga, that's still going to be a knock against him. And then perimeter defense, again, this kind of goes back to size for him. He's just limited in how impactful he can be defensively. It's not for lack of effort. It's not for lack of being in the right spot or making good decisions in terms of when to go for steals and whatnot. He's just limited because of his size. The likelihood for Ryan Nembhard of getting drafted is about 10%. And it's unfortunate because he could legitimately have an All-American season for Gonzaga. I wouldn't be, the odds of him being an All-American this year are higher than him getting drafted by a significant amount in my mind. I think it's, without having thought too much about it, 40-ish% for him being an All-American. It wouldn't stun me if he's on one of those teams. But even if he does that, I don't see him getting drafted just because of the size pretty much alone. That is the most damning factor against Ryan Nembhard in this draft class. And it's unfortunate because, again, you can control a lot of things, but you just can't control that. Two more guys here. We'll actually go Braden Smith before we close it out with Nolan Hickman. Braden Smith, 2027 class. He will do nothing this year to improve his draft stock because he won't be on the floor. I should say he won't do anything to improve his draft stock in the eyes of scouts and general managers this year. He's probably going to do a lot of things not on the court in games, at least, to improve that draft stock. But again, having not seen him in Gonzaga's system, it's hard to know the pros and cons here. It's going to sound somewhat similar to Nembhard because they are very similar as players, which is why Mark Few wanted to bring him in to be the Nembhard replacement after this upcoming season. The pros for Braden Smith, pick and roll navigation is great. The shooting is there, the passing, the transition offense. The cons right now, the defense, we'll see what that looks like. The competition level up to this point in his career hasn't been very strong, but that will change. His age, I think, could work against him, especially if he sits out, since he's going to sit out this year. The earliest he's likely to get drafted in 2026. That would be his redshirt junior year, but of course he would have been in college for 4 years at that point. I put 5% for getting drafted, but it's really hard to know at this point. Obviously, after this year, we still won't have a great sense of that. But once he gets on the floor and we see what he can do, we'll have a better sense of his NBA future. Nolan Hickman, last but not least. Unfortunate that it's somewhat similar conversation to what we're going to say about Ryan Nembhard. The skills are a bit different for Hickman. The pros, the outside shooting, as opposed to being a con for Nembhard, it's a pro for Nolan Hickman. He's clutch. He shoots the ball really well from beyond the arc. His off-ball movement is great. He is a secondary creator in a way where he's not a pure point guard, but if you need him to create, if you need him to facilitate, he's more than capable of doing that. His on-ball defense, he's a tenacious, hard-nosed defender. Mark Few has put him against the opposing team's best guard frequently throughout his career. He's a very experienced player, tough player, clutch player, good outside shooter. The cons for him, his age and his height. Same types of stuff. I think, again, he's not a point guard, and I think that's probably the biggest knock is that he has the size to be an NBA point guard, but he doesn't have the skill set to be an NBA point guard. He plays like a two guard. Undersized two guards, really hard to make it in the NBA. There's a whole bunch of 6'3" combo guards who just aren't getting that opportunity. A bunch of dudes who want to be CJ McCollum. It's really hard to be CJ McCollum. Nolan Hickman is in that ilk. He's that vibe. But I don't see the overall skill sets as being enough to kind of make up for the fact that he's a senior and the fact that he's a 6'3" two guard. Again, it's not really anything he can do about some of that. He's about as good as a two guard as you're going to see. He's an excellent player and he's a great shooter, but it just doesn't really fit in the NBA, unfortunately. The scoring around the rim, he's good at that, but I think, again, physicality is an area where he could be, if he was a little stronger, if he's a little better at finishing through contact, that would help him. But again, it doesn't really make up for the unfortunate fact that he's an older prospect who's not tall enough to play the position he is best suited for at the NBA. I put the odds of him getting drafted about 2%. I just don't see it for Nolan Hickman. As much as I love him, as much as I've enjoyed watching his Gonzaga basketball career, it just, again, similar to EK or Nembhard or Drew Timme, it's just the differences between college and the NBA sometimes really hamper certain players, and Hickman falls right into that category. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for hanging out here at the end of July, joining me here on Locked On Zags. I really appreciate it. We got more fun stuff coming your way later this week. We got a couple guests lined up to talk about this Gonzaga basketball season. We'll, of course, keep you up to date on the Olympics as we get more looks at Rui and Petrusev and Kelly and Andrew. And, of course, Yvonne for Team Canada and Sonny Greiniker and Casey Bosch on the 3-on-3 side. And, of course, Mark Few coaching for Team USA as well. All that stuff coming up your way on future episodes here on Locked On Zags. Hit that subscribe button if you have not done so yet. Go check out the other great shows on the Locked On Podcast Network. And until tomorrow, as always, go Zags.